Hello and welcome to Comedy in a Nutshell. I'm your host Mark Decano, and each episode I invite a comedian out of punchline purgatory and into the virtual studio where I ask about what comedy means to them. Is it catharsis, is it rebellion, or is it a socially acceptable way to scream into the void? Here we unpack the cerebral from the silly and sum it all up in a nutshell. I'm the comedy nerd who's seen more than 1,800 different comedians perform live comedy, and you can find out about my journey in comedy fandom on my website, thecomedynerd.com. Please also take a moment to like, subscribe, rate, review and share the podcast. Thank you. My guest this episode is a comedian who's overcome multiple personal challenges to take a journey of self-discovery through comedy, through which he's made multiple Edinburgh Fringe shows and won multiple awards. It's stand-up comedian Jonny Pelham. So if you think all the way back before you were a comedian, did you find that comedy sort of loomed large? Was it really a big influence on you?
Not comedy in a stand-up sense at all, really. I mean, I used to watch they had shows on like Comedy Central or something called like The World Stands Up.
Yeah.
And which like a stand-up show. And I watched a bit of Apollo. But really, I probably got into comedy because I've got sort of a mild disability. And then I went to like a pretty much all Asian school. Like I was the only white boy in my class. And so I just had to learn how to be funny as a teenager, or like as a secondary school person, to not get bullied, really. So I think there was a survival instinct to my comedy.
Right.
And, you know, luckily it worked quite well. But I think that's where it came from. It just going like, right, I could easily get bullied here. Let's find a way not to be bullied. And humour was that way.
Was it successful?
It was actually, yeah. It was, I talk about it in my show, but I was briefly in a gang called the Blazing Bangladeshis, just me and 5 Bangladeshi people. So I did manage to integrate myself pretty successfully, really. And I think that was where the humour came from. It's just, you know, if anyone was mean to me, I just had to be meaner back to them in a way that would make people not want to be mean to me.
What was it then about that made you think, oh, I'm onto something here?
When I completely fell into stand-up, I went to university and I was literally just walking around Freshers Week, signing up to things, you know, like skydiving and all sorts of nonsense, being like, I wonder who I am as an 18-year-old. And then I signed up to comedy. And it all went from there, really, which was, amazing.
So what was the university? What was the club there?
It was Newcastle University, and the Stand, which is one of I still see it as my sort of home club, like it's my favourite club in the country, the Newcastle Stand. It was just opening up as I started. And if you don't know the Newcastle Stand, I mean, they have a night called Red Raw on a Wednesday, and you'd literally get 300 people there, and everyone would be doing new material, and it would, it'd be like your first gig there, and they were such a lovely crowd. So I either did those gigs or I did gigs at the Newcastle University Comedy Society, which were also very lovely. And so I had such a misunderstanding of what comedy was for the first like 2 or 3 years. I just thought it was this beautiful, quite easy thing where hundreds of people turn up. And, and it wasn't until I started going to the pubs around Newcastle I discovered really what comedy actually was.
So that's something I love to ask people, is that what your expectations were going in, if any, and how did that contrast with reality? What was it that surprised you?
I genuinely, I'm not saying this to be like, I had no expectations really going in. Like I say, it was just me thinking, oh, this seems fun.
Yeah.
And then I luckily did quite well early on. So I got to the finals of a few competitions. So I probably felt like, oh, this is really good. And then it gets harder when you start having to do 20s at comedy clubs. You know what I mean? Because the first like few years I was doing very easy gigs. Normally you'd be doing like 10 minutes in the middle.
Yeah.
And then you suddenly, so the start was quite like relatively easy. Like when I think about like the London open mic scene, I live in London now. It just feels insane. You know what these people, like it's like there's 30 acts, there's no audience, everyone's stressed. It's like I can't imagine. Like, I think I would have quit had that been, like, I think I was very fortunate at the beginning. And then the leap for me was going from like doing a 10 at a lovely gig on a Saturday at the Stand to like then try to do like an opening 20 at a harder gig, you know, and that's a big leap, really.
Do you remember your first gig fondly then?
I've got a very bad memory, so I can't actually remember what my first gig was. But my sense of that early time of doing comedy was that it was pretty like chilled out. I was just at university. I wasn't thinking this is my career at all. So I was just sort of swanning around doing lovely gigs. And there was a new material gig in Newcastle called the Dog and Parrot. And because Newcastle was quite small, it had a really lovely, like, helpful scene. You know, like where there's like probably 20 people and everyone's slightly sort of strange, and that's why they've come to comedy. And you know, I had made some great friends there with people who there's no other way I would have become friends with them other than stand up. Really.
Right. Yeah. Did you find that going into that experience that it being sort of new and something that you weren't really familiar with, you kind of fell into, as you said, did you find that it was a nerve-wracking experience?
Oh, I'm sure it was. I mean, it must have been nerve-wracking, you know, to comedy to that many people.
Yeah.
But on the whole, like, it was nerve-wracking, and also they went well enough that I think I was like, "Oh, this is fun," yeah. But I'm sure it was nerve-wracking. But I mean, I'm quite detached from my emotions, really. So there's a decent chance. I actually can't remember how I felt, but I mean, logically, I think it must be that I was nervous, right? Otherwise, that would be insane. Otherwise, I'd basically just be a sociopath.
Because you've been going a number of years now, is that the sort of thing that, as you say, emotional detachment? Forgive me for asking, is that part of your personality, or is that something that you've learned to separate yourself, the person, from the art, if you like?
Definitely part of my personality. And I guess a lot of my Edinburgh shows are about me trying to find out who I am without wanting to sound too much like a wanker. But I think there is like a thing of writing to like be like, what's going on for me right now?
Yes.
And then I'm not very aware of it. And then stuff I start writing, like my stand-up, I'm like, oh, I guess that's what's going on. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, it's a sort of, there is definitely a therapeutic element to figuring out what's happening in my life, which I quite enjoy, but, you know, arguably isn't very healthy.
Well, I mean, your comedy it's all about you personally, but it's also those quite these personal stories, these personal experiences that might be very unfamiliar to an audience member. Comedians often talk about using their stage time as therapy. Have you found it therapeutic in that sense to talk about those experiences?
I guess therapy is probably the wrong framing, in that it's very different to therapy. I guess, you know, with therapy, often you're trying to discover things and patterns of behavior and all that stuff, and which are holding you back. And I think what stand-up allows you to do is allows me to do anyway, is to focus on aspects of my life that I probably need to think about, but don't particularly want to think about, but then gives me a focus because I'm trying to turn it into a joke. So rather than sort of running around in your head, you know, whatever the thing is, you know, like right now I'm writing a bit about just coming out of a breakup. And it's like, so rather than just thinking about that, I'm trying to think, like, how can I make that funny? So you're doing something with that feeling, but rather than just like sitting in it, you're trying to create something with it. So it's like, so I don't think it is therapy. I think there are different things, but I think it's a way of like focusing your brain on something, but with an end goal, which is, how do I make people laugh with this idea?
Yeah. I've talked on this podcast before about comedy being a communication tool for getting across ideas in a palatable way or an understandable way. When you're talking about your personal experiences, do you find it difficult to make up jokes, or is it if you're trying to make something funny, does that make it easier to talk about?
I think, and again, I don't sound like a wank here, but I think if you talk about your personal experience and really dig into the truth of it, I tend to think what you think and your feelings and your thoughts and your actions go against what people would expect them to be, just because of the complexity of being a human. And so there's often just humour in that. Do you know what I mean? So like this, like after a breakup, what you actually do probably isn't, and maybe it is, but probably isn't, you know, go and eat chocolates and watch a movie, which is like the cliche. If you try to write that joke without any lived experience, it's probably something absolutely crazy. You know what I mean? Like, and so like, I feel like if you just look like follow the truth of what you did and follow the nuance and ambiguity in your feelings, then you can fine tune that because it is different from the cliche or the expected behavior. And in that gap, there's often comedy.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. What about then the persona of you on stage? We've talked about you talking about yourself and a little bit. How much of what you are presenting on stage is an honest, unvarnished version of yourself, and how much of it is as a character that you're playing a stage version of yourself?
It's certainly no conscious construct of a character. I think I'm more silly off stage than I am on stage, and I'm trying to figure out how to, well, that's not conscious. I'm just trying to figure out in my head how to be more silly on stage. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
So I think on stage I tend to be quite like, this is my next joke. Da, 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 da. And in life I'm more silly, I guess is the right word. And so I'm trying to figure out how to get that aspect of my personality into my show. And I'm thinking about that at the moment, and I still don't really have an answer. But it's something I'm like trying to figure out, is how to be more who I am on stage.
You mentioned having been participant in a number of competitions before, and I know that you did student comedian, and So You Think You're Funny. How do you feel about competitions in general?
I guess I have no strong feelings about them in the sense of they really help me. And, if I was a new actor, I'd definitely enter them because they can get you a leg up in what's like a crazily competitive industry.
Yeah.
And also there's loads of actors who I know who went out in the first round who are brilliant. So I don't think they're for everyone. I think I'd enter them. If they go well, that's great. If they don't, it doesn't really mean anything. That would be my general summation of them. I mean, they helped me. They got me an agent and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So they probably helped me. They definitely helped me. So I would enter them. But yeah, don't put yourself on the line for them if you don't go through it. That genuinely doesn't mean anything.
And also, obviously, we're going to talk about your Edinburgh show coming up, but you've done Edinburgh a number of times, and that is again, a very competitive environment, competing for the industry's attention. Do you have any competitive part of you at all? If not in competitions, do you feel like yourself competing for attention at the Fringe?
Not me. I mean, I'm trying to think what's the truth. Not really.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if you've written a good show, right?
Yeah.
So there's years I've gone up there and I thought this show's a bit shit. And you think after about day 4, you're like, this isn't going to do great. And there's other days where you think, oh, this is a really good show. And you sort of have an internal compass, I think, of how you're feeling about it. And then I've done it enough now to the industry's just sort of, there's such an insanity to it all, who gets zoomed up the ladder, who doesn't get zoomed up the ladder. And you just have to accept, I think, that there's sort of a mad industry that's understandable.
Yeah. And
just keep doing what you're doing and just keep trying to make the stuff that you want to make, really, and would like to watch, I think.
Yeah. How has your Edinburgh Fringe experience been broadly? Because you've been there many times now, considering the social aspects as well as the industry side and the shows going well or going poorly. How has your overarching experience been like?
I think I really enjoy it. It's sort of, I mean, I really love it. And I've had so many, I went up there for the first time when I was like 21, maybe. I'm now 33. So it's like I've been up there loads of times. It's incredibly fun. It's also stressful and awful and all these other things. And it's I mean, I wouldn't keep going if I didn't really enjoy it in some way. And also, you always go crazy. I mean, it's just too many gigs in a row. The audiences. The fascinating thing about Edinburgh is it's the same room, the same time, the same show, and the results can vary so wildly. Where some days people laugh at everything, and other days people laugh at nothing, and it's like all the variables feel like they've been like fixed except for the audience. So it does give you a sense of like just how much of it is just like what the crowd's energy is on that day is so determinative of like the quality of how you feel about yourself for the rest of the day.
Do you go and see other comedians, other shows at Edinburgh or elsewhere?
Not really. I always mean to, but then when you get up there, I might see a mate on like the last day, but like I don't see many shows.
Yeah,
I don't really watch much comedy. And like obviously I watch it at gigs I'm at, but I don't like. I mean, I don't. I wouldn't watch a special or something.
right.
I can't remember the last like special of anyone's I've watched on TV. It just feels like I can't think of anything worse than turning on a comedy show when I'm at home.
Is that because you look at it analytically, like as with a comedian's eye, or does comedy just not hold the same allure when it's your job?
I think probably a bit. I'm watching it with a critical eye, thinking, "Oh, that's a great joke," and also I think the magic is like I love theatre and stuff, and I'm sure I could watch quite bad theatre. I mean, not all theatre. Some theatre is awful, but like some theatre I'll watch, and I'll be like, "That was incredible." And then if I was to speak to someone who knew about theatre, they'd say, "Oh, that's crap."
Right.
You know, but I don't understand it. Or like art, I can be like, "Well, that's amazing." But I'm sure. Whereas with stand-up, it's like I know the tricks, or I can think, "Oh, that's a really well constructed gag." But like it doesn't have that magic of like seeing something that you can't understand. And so the comics I really love are like people who are doing stuff that probably isn't straight stand up, because then I'm like, what's happening here? You know, which I really enjoy. Like I love sort of clown and stuff, and it's because I have no capability of doing that. So it's like I don't know how you make this funny. You know, like whatever they're doing. So I think things which I don't understand, I find more enjoyable to watch. I think.
Yeah. So your 2019 show, Off Limits, got a lot of interest at Edinburgh, and then shortly thereafter, comedy ceased for best part of 2 years. How do you switch up those changing gears? What did you do during the lockdown period, and how did you come back after that?
Well, I guess during lockdown, sort of thoughts about my career just went away, really, because you're just suddenly thinking, I wonder if everyone's going to die. So, I mean, it was sort of stupid looking back now that I did almost nothing in my career in those few years. I just moved back in with my parents with my girlfriend, and actually had quite a nice time. And I think I got a few script commission things again, luckily. So I was just able to work on that. So it was quite like, I mean, horror and terror aside, it was actually quite a nice period of my life that I just moved back with my family, and just had a nice time with my girlfriend there in the attic. But there was I didn't think about stand up at all, really. Which clearly that was a time where you need to make a podcast.
You're preaching to the converted.
Yeah, but it makes sense, right? I mean, that was the time where everyone suddenly that was definitely the time where you realised you were never going to write a book. Because everyone everyone's like thinks they're going to write a book, and then we all had 2 years and did absolutely nothing. Well, I did nothing during that time.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh yeah, maybe I'm just lazy. Maybe that's who I am.
So you talk about writing. Do you see yourself there as a writer who performs, as opposed to a performer who has to write material?
I think so. I think that would be my. Yeah, I think so. Like I would love to get better at performing. Particularly when I started. I mean, you talked about the Chortle Student Awards. If you see me on that, I'm literally just rocking back and forth, saying, and that sort of is a performance, right? The performance is nervous man but that wasn't conscious. That was literally just who I was. And so I definitely see myself as a writer. And then you have to figure out how important performance is. And I mean, I know, like when I have no nerves before I go on stage, we talked about nerves earlier, I can just get completely on autopilot, and then the people laugh less. So I'm aware that there is even though I don't know what I'm doing differently, I'm aware that when I am just like not really in the mood, there's like a volume difference to the crowd, which is obviously because I'm less excited saying it or less believable or whatever it is. So I guess I know performance is important, but it's not something that I think about probably as much as I should.
Yeah. Do you find yourself happier doing a spot on the bill or writing, or is it the long form performance where you get to do a full hour? Where's your happy place in that sense?
I think all of them, without wanting to dodge the question. I love doing like a 20-minute spot or like a sold out comedy club, and it's just every line you want to make people laugh.
Yeah.
I love writing, on scripts and stuff. What I love about scripts is in stand-up, you're sort of forced to be who you are, like you are, I am me. And that's whereas in stand-up, in script writing, you can be, stupid, you can be like you can write every character. So you can be different people, which I like.
Yeah.
And then doing shows I really like because like you have an hour to sort of try and say something to the crowd, or like it feels like it is a different thing. Like when I do my shows, they're not just like straight stand up for an hour.
Yeah.
So there is then more of something of trying to like figure out what I'm trying to articulate to the audience and what's the best way to do that, and then also it has to be funny. So that's also a very fun challenge that I enjoy.
Yeah. But also you've done some television appearances, things like Live at the Apollo, Mock the Week and so on. How does your television experience differ from the stand-up?
I mean, doing Apollo is very similar in that you're literally just doing stand-up.
Yes.
And then the panel shows. I mean, I've not done many of them, but they're fun. But they're just a completely different skill set in that you just have to figure out how to get into the conversation and stuff. But yeah, again, it's an enjoyable. I enjoy doing them. Yeah, if there's any TV producers in listening, get in contact. I'd do more.
Well, let's get back to Edinburgh then. So your upcoming show this year, Is It Me? What's that all about and what can people expect?
What is it all about? Great question. I think it's about, so I went for a breakup, I moved to London.
Yeah.
And I guess it's about me trying to figure out whether, I think it's sort of about how this, at the moment, but all these things are subject to change. It's about how I've always sort of read self-help books and all that sort of crap. And I sort of wonder whether the focus on the self within our society sort of stops us seeking political change in the sense of, we locate the problem within ourselves. And actually, everything's got shitter, more inequality, more poverty, less social security. And that the focus on the self stops us seeking political change. If that is coherent as a sentence. And I mean, that sounds quite grandiose, but then it will just be a series of jokes about my dick and stuff. So it's like, there's you always say, what's the show about? And you say something very, like, slightly wanky. And then you come and watch the show and it's not that at all. But that's so, I think in myself, I'm trying to figure that out now. It's like, is my, like, all the shit I'm doing, is it helpful? Or is it just like the way in which capitalism makes you think about yourself?
Yeah.
And stop. And like in the 60s, they were trying to change the world. Now we're all, having ice baths or whatever. It's like there's a sort of discrepancy there that I think is probably unhealthy.
You're talking about, with each successive show, trying to identify who you are. Do you think that you're the comedian that you wanted to be?
I don't think you massively choose what type of comedian you are. I just think you start writing and you start performing and you figure it out. I remember I had a guy when I was starting at university who would always say, look, I think I'm going to be darker, and then he'd write some dark jokes. And I remember at the time thinking, I want to be sillier, and then he'd write sillier jokes. I remember at the time thinking, I don't quite think that's the right way around. and I might be wrong. Like I have no sense of, I sort of think anyone who speaks like authoritatively about anything in comedy is, he's sort of slightly mad, because it's all, the whole thing about it is each individual does whatever they want with a microphone.
Yes.
But that was my sense is you just write, like, I would love to be able to write more accessible sort of stuff. You know what I mean? Like I would love to, but I have quite a dark sense of humor and stuff, and so the stuff I write tends to follow that path.
Yeah.
But I never ever think, oh, I want to write a dark, edgy joke now. You know, that it would just be an insane starting point for creativity, I think. So I think you just figure out who you are as you go. And you never figure out, like if someone was to say, what type of comic am I now? I could sort of like say words that signified vaguely what I am, but that it wouldn't have any, like, there wouldn't be like a truth to that. And also what I am will always be evolving. You know, so it's not like a fixed thing where you're like, this is who I am now, this is who I'll be in 30 years. And there's no need to think anymore about that. You know, who you are is just going to constantly keep changing with the world and as you evolve as well.
Yeah. So as your role in comedy evolved then, at what point did you find yourself calling yourself a comedian?
Again, people get really hung up on this in terms of like, can you call yourself a comedian if you're not a professional comedian? Who cares, man? Yeah. I don't know the answer to that question, honestly. I guess probably I left university and then I went straight into doing stand-up as like a job. But I was sort of getting a megabus everywhere and living in a squat. So like I was able to make it work because I decided I couldn't be asked getting a job. And I was willing to live on beans for, you know, a few years. But I mean, it's not I mean, I think if you want to call yourself a comedian and you've done one gig, do it. You know, like some people feel quite gatekeeper about that stuff. I just don't care at all. Yeah. So just I guess it's whenever you think you're a comedian, just start calling yourself a comedian.
Yeah. Do you set yourself objectives for like the things that you want to achieve, or like a bill that you might want to be on, people you want to perform with, things like that? Do you have those kind of targets?
No, I don't. And I think maybe to fault, really, in that I think I should probably be more, there's something about people who have those goals I think is probably quite helpful. You know what I mean? Like to know, like not necessarily what bill you want to be on, but to be like, I want this, and then to really work towards it. Yeah. My brain doesn't quite work like that, but it's not, I sort of admire people who it does work. You know what I mean? People who set goals and then work every day to achieve them. I think, yeah, that's how you live a happy, good life and own a house.
Well, what about other ways to measure success then? How do you look upon how well you're doing? How do you judge whether you're going in the right direction? How do you judge that you're developing that persona, that person, that character of you in a manner that you want to?
I think you just have to be interested in the thing you're working on at that moment in time, and sort of trust that will get you somewhere in the end. Yeah. So I think that. So right now I'm genuinely enjoying writing this show that I'm working on, and so that I'm not thinking about like what do I want. Like obviously I want it to do well, but I'm not. That isn't like part of. I'm not bringing that to like the writing process. So I mean, so it's almost like the work is. I mean, I really really love doing stand up, and the fact that I'm able to make a living from it is, you know, incredible. Yeah. And the thing I love about it is that I get to go, like I've got a new material gig tonight, and I'm just going to go and try some new stuff, and it's like that is a great feeling, and the feeling of when like a new joke works is such a joyful feeling. Yeah. So I think what I'm saying is I tend not to think about like where do I want to get to or what's my measurement of success, and tend to just enjoy the creative like flow. Or, you know, and sometimes it's shit. You know, I'm not for a second saying that sometimes it's always like great. Sometimes you start thinking, why can't I think of anything? Oh, this is shit. Why am I like this? How have I been going this long and I still don't know how to write a joke? But that's the job really, and that's why I focus more on, rather than being like what is like I have no sense of what I want from Edinburgh in terms of like I'd like this many stars or I'd like this many people to see it, or which again I think people who do that I think that's completely fair enough, and I think actually there's a real logic in it, and it's probably helpful for me to think more in that way. but that just isn't quite how my brain works. So I'm just sort of trying to make the show good.
Yeah.
And then hopefully that ends up in good things happening.
Yeah. Well, what about feedback then, in the sense of star ratings and reviews and things like that? Do you read reviews or do you shun them? Or how do you respond to that kind of feedback?
I tend to read them. Last year, the last show I did, I just read them at the end, so I didn't know what was going on. I mean, I guess the thing about reviews is some people, I think there is something about taking it. There are some reviewers who I think have reviewed for 20 years, have lots of experience of comedy. And I think, even if I disagree with them, I think, all right, so what is in this? And there's other people, because of the ecosystem of Edinburgh, who are literally 20 years old and are just writing for student paper. And I do think, so those reviews, I just, and I don't mean this in like a fuck them sort of way. I think fair enough, they've got free access to a comedy show. But I put less stock in them, whether they're good or bad, because I just think, well, this is just a 20-year-old. You know what I mean? Like, this isn't, not that 20-year-olds can't have valid opinions, just I'm not going to put my sort of emotional well-being at the, and I think so I read them and sometimes I disagree with them, sometimes they make me a bit pissed off, sometimes I think, yeah, this guy really got it. He's given me 5 stars. He understands comedy. But on the whole, I think you have to just be able to distance yourself from that and go, this isn't. And like I know, I've got some really good reviews for shows that I thought weren't great, and I've got some bad reviews for shows that I thought were good. And I think I know that more than them. But also, I don't think most reviewers can step outside the room they're in. And so you'll do a show 25 times in Edinburgh. 5 times there'll be the worst 5 shows. There has to be like a line of how much the show was good on each day.
Yeah.
And if they come in on the shittest day, they'll see a fundamentally different thing than if they come in a good day. And, I don't think they can probably see beyond that sometimes. But you go, oh yeah, that day was crap. Of course they thought the show was crap,
Yeah. And like you said, it varies. Each audience varies. So, and the energy in the room might not be there, and
completely. And within like 4 minutes often, you're like, well, this is going to be bad.
Yeah.
My second show, I had like my closer in my club set, like 5 minutes in. And if they chuckled at that, I'd just think, well, that was the best joke in the show, guys. So you've got 45 minutes, but it's only going to be worse than that. So good luck.
So in that sense then, what do you think have been your best and worst experiences in comedy so far?
Ooh, big question. Best experience, worst experience. I guess best experience for like the feeling of doing it was probably Apollo, just because I grew up watching it.
Right.
And, it was such a it was like a thing when I was 14, I'd watch on TV. And so to be able to do it was like, wow, this is incredible. Worst experience? I don't know. I mean, there's nothing terrible. I mean, you have awful gigs, right? And then you just go, oh, that was awful. And then you move on with your life. So, I mean, I've had loads of bad gigs. But I haven't had one moment where I've like been like, this is terrible. I mean, I'm sure I have. I just can't. Worse, I just generally can't think of anything where like that is a spectacularly bad moment. This is a funny story. It's definitely not the worst moment in terms of like I was like, this is awful. Yeah. But I was in a wheelchair for about 6 months when I was about 10, and I used to have a bit where I said. I was in a wheelchair for 6 months. I quite enjoyed it. It was good crack. I'd recommend it if you ever get the chance. And then I was doing a gig. I was really new, and there was like a guy in a wheelchair sat like on the front row. So, and I realised, and everyone sort of looked at me, and I went, panicked, went, "Oh, do you like being in a wheelchair?" And then he just very sadly said no. It's like it was just an absolute end of gig moment where just somebody in a wheelchair just saying no. Yeah, that was really funny. But so I mean, I have hundreds of stories like that of just being on stage, just doing something stupid and it going catastrophically wrong.
Is that, I don't know, some people might relish that. Do you like when things go sour and gives you the opportunity to think on your feet and improvise and bounce back from that? Or is it like, no, got to stick to the script?
I really like it, but yeah, I do really like it. But I think there is a thing about doing stand up when it's your job and it pays your rent and all that stuff, that you have to be. I mean, I think this is maybe the difference between, when I was saying I like doing circuit gigs. But with circuit gigs, there's a sort of duty to the promoter and to getting booked back again is the real reason. I'm saying it like it's a duty to the promoter, but I really mean it's a duty to capitalism. That you have to be good like 80. Every joke has to work like 85% of the time or 90% of the time,
Yeah.
So there's not that, and I'm not that good at talking to the audience. Like I'm all right at it, but I'm not like, it's not like a skill where I'm like, I nail this. So there is a sense of just like, you just have to be like, I just do my jokes that I know work, and I try and turn that over. But it's like there is like a thing of like, it is the thing that stops you being totally creative. Is you go, I need this club to book me again next year, so I'm just going to do stuff that works,
Yeah.
And so I quite like it when I like it when it goes wrong. I find it really funny, and I find it enjoyable. And then also you can't do that much. But again, I think I was saying earlier I'd like to be more silly on stage. I think that's what I'd like. I like it. I do. There is something I find funny about it going badly that I don't know how to like do anything with at the moment. But I know that's a feeling I have when things are going a bit wrong.
Yeah.
There's a sense of excitement of like, oh shit, this is, how the fuck, what's happening now? So I do enjoy that feeling.
Yeah.
But I don't know how to make that. I don't know how to do anything useful with that.
Yeah. We spoke briefly about, you said there's things like in clowning that you wouldn't do or you couldn't do. Is there anything that perhaps you've got a vision of on the horizon that, one day I would like to be able to have a go at this?
No, I saw in this new bit. There's a world in which I was thinking about this today, where I talk about. So I sort of talk a bit about how I don't know if psychiatry knows what it's talking about a lot of the time, and then I sort of want to say I'm not like a French Post-Modernist who doesn't believe in anything, and there's a bit of me that wants to try and act out being a French. Terribly, that would be the joke. Would be me being this sort of French postmodernist person, and really, I'm doing that because I know, and I think I'll probably chicken out of it because I don't know how to do it. But there's something about trying that, which would be totally different for me because it would be me. So, and that would be a silly. That was literally because I thought I want to get silly on stage, and then I had a bit where I was like. Saying something slightly pretentious about truth and about psychiatry. And I was like, how do I undercut this? And I thought, maybe I could just be silly and pretend to be this French person. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
But that's so different to anything I have ever done. So I might do it at a few previews and it probably bomb and then I'll probably never do it again. But, But that's sort of something silly. And that was with wouldn't you talk about like things you aim for? One of the things I did think about this anime show is I'd like to just be able to be slightly more silly in myself on stage.
Yeah.
So and then that led then to me thinking about doing this French character person.
Yeah. That's the joy of comedy, is that because you've got that freedom on stage, you could just try anything at least once.
Well, that's what's amazing, and that is what's amazing about comedy is that. You literally can have a thought in the afternoon and then be performing on stage that evening. And then if it works, you're like, holy shit, that is the genuinely joyful thing about stand-up, I think, is, I've got a gig tonight and after this, I'm going to go and do some writing. And hopefully, the plan is that some of the stuff I write, I'll be trying tonight. And there's not many jobs where you have that level of sort of immediate gratification.
Yes. Do you think you've learned any one important lesson that sort of informs what you do going forward, or sort of like that's become part of your philosophy, if you like?
I mean, again, this is a wanky thing to say, but you always sound like a wank on these podcasts because you sort of,
Why does everyone always say that?
I think because you very rarely talk about what you do, and then when you talk about it, you realise how high, what high self-esteem you hold yourself and you are. You're like, yes, I'm going to say something very noble now about how great I am, actually. But I think it is. I think for me, it is always like, what's the truth of this? And then when you get into the truth, it's so much more complex and weird. And then within that, there's humour. So I think when I'm like, how do I make this joke funny? I mean, and sometimes, look, everyone giving advice is wrong. Pretty much. So there'll be some times where that isn't the case, and actually there's nothing there. But often, I think if you're thinking, how do I make this funny? It's like, well, what made me laugh about it to begin with, and what's like the simplest way of thinking it. And then when I like think simply, and then when you're in the simple idea, like lean into like the truth of it and the complexity of it. And then often there'll be some humor in that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Who are the people you think who inspired you early on? And do you still have people around you who continue to inspire you?
I remember seeing Tony Law in like 2012, and he did that elephant show that I can't remember the name of. I think got nominated. I mean, almost certainly no one will have any idea what I mean when I say the elephant show. But there was, it was about, they had a bit about elephants at the end, and it was insane, and it was completely crazy. And it really, because as I said, I hadn't really watched that much stand up other than like straight stand up on television. And so that was like, holy shit, you can do anything. So I was doing a show at the Stand with like two other people from Newcastle, because and then Tony Law was on like an hour after me in the Stand 1. We were just in like a tiny little stand venue, and so I saw it like 3 or 4 times. So I was just like, this is insane. And I just loved it. I loved the chaos of it and the madness of it.
Yeah.
And so that was a big thing. I mean, and then, if you were to compare me and Tony Law's act, they couldn't be more diametrically opposed, really. Yeah. So I wasn't inspired about it in the sense it changed my like process. But I remember thinking, oh, fuck, you can do anything on that stage, which was quite a nice, like, a moment.
Yeah.
And now, does anyone inspire me now? I mean, I think people are good at comedy, but I don't know if anyone does. That's funny. But I'm not like looking. I mean, I've got people who I think are great at comedy.
Yeah.
I really think Bobby Mayer's great, and Harriet Kemsley and Sean McLaughlin, and people. But I don't know if I'd say they inspire me. Maybe I should say they inspire me. So it's a nice thing to say, isn't it?
Jonny, how can we find out about you and where we can see you performing?
Well, I have a website that I recently lost control to someone who bought the domain name, but I've got a new website, which is jonnypelham.co.uk. And then I've got Instagram. Instagram's where I put most stuff of mine out. It's Jonny_Pelham. And then I'm doing a show at Edinburgh at Hive 2 at 9 p.m. called Is It Me? Which may or may not involve a French Post-Modernist. God, as I say that, it makes me want to kill myself. So I think you might have just left the show. But yes, come to that if you're in Edinburgh, and that sounds good.
I've never seen a character be bored and die so fast.
It was when you say it out loud, the idea of a French poet, it's like, oh, right, I've become one of those acts, have I?
So my final question then is always the same. Jonny, how would you sum up comedy in a nutshell?
How would I sum up comedy in a nutshell? Fuck knows. I guess comedy is just connection, isn't it? Right? You're just trying to find a way to connect with people, which I guess is true of stand-up and just in life, I think. And it's a great way of doing it. I mean, that's what I love about stand-up, and this is sort of a separate point to how I'd sum up comedy. Well, that's too big a question for me, so I'll change the question. What I love about comedy is that it can, I feel like when you're talking about like Donald Trump or like Starmer and all these sort of people who are twattish, the news and like serious discourse and all that has to take them seriously, right? It has to live within their bubble. Whereas what comedy can do is just go, this guy's a fucking idiot. Yeah. And it's like there's like a clear spoken emperor has no clothes beauty to being able to ridicule, mock something that's so stupid.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I love about comedy. I love the fact that it doesn't have to like meet the world in a serious way. And I think there's often more truth in the fact that you can go, this guy's an idiot. There's a sort of wisdom there. So I think that's what I love about comedy is you can just you can eschew having to talk seriously about stuff.
Yeah.
And I think therefore you can get to often a lot more truth by doing that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that didn't answer the question really, but I think I answered a different question, which is I think what you're meant to do when you're writing an essay, isn't it? You're meant to go like, they ask you a question about something and then you go, I don't know how to answer that. So that's why your question really means this.
The politician's response.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Jonny, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks so much for having me. It's great.